Welcome once again to the Brownstone, Wolfe's sanctuary of logic, orchids, and murder. Do tell us where in the world you're listening from, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts. If you enjoy these cases, consider liking and subscribing. Now then, shall we begin? Nero Wolfe and the steamer through the Aegean. It was one of those late October mornings when Manhattan kept quiet under its own weight. The trees on 35th Street clung to the last of their yellow leaves, and the air smelled like newsprint, wet concrete, and the kind of cold that didn't ask permission to creep into your coat. I'd just come back from a walk that Wolfe hadn't authorised, which meant I hadn't gone far. A stop at the cigar shop, a loaf of rye bread for Fritz, and 10 minutes watching a city bus unload a woman and her 7 shopping bags, none of which contained her patience. I stepped into the Brownstone's front hall and shut the door behind me, slow and silent. Fritz was already in the kitchen. I could smell butter turning golden in a pan, and Wolfe was naturally upstairs with his orchids, sealed away like some tropical secret. On the hall table sat the morning mail, mostly bills, a few catalogues, and one envelope, thin, foreign, and addressed in the careful script of someone who measured their words and their vowels. I recognized the postmark immediately. Greece. I turned it over. No return address. Just a pair of faint smudges where someone had touched it too long before letting it go. Now, I'll admit, I'm no linguist. But if a thing smells of trouble, I don't need it translated. I brought it upstairs, skipping the creaky step like always, and knocked once on the door to the plant rooms. Nothing. I tried again. 3 measured raps. Polite but not apologetic. Still nothing. I called, "Mail, foreign, unusual, possibly coded with death threats." That got a grunt. A full invitation in Wolfe's language. I stepped inside. Wolfe stood beside the misting nozzles, inspecting a Miltonia with the same intensity one might reserve for an affidavit. He didn't look at me. I do not require interruptions. You don't, but you're getting one. I held out the envelope. He took it with a reluctance usually reserved for menu substitutions. Wolfe examined the postmark, frowned, and opened it with the silver blade he kept near the watering tray. The contents were minimal. 1 black and white photograph, matte finish, edges worn. A woman on a ship's deck, half turned toward the camera. Elegant posture, hair in a scarf. The sea behind her, the Aegean by the look of it. On the back, scrawled in pencil, "I lied about everything, L." Wolfe stared at it a moment longer than I expected. Then, with surgical precision, he dropped it onto the edge of the nearby table. I waited. Nothing. "You want me to guess which lie she means?" I offered. Wolfe grunted again, which I'd already gotten once today and didn't plan on celebrating. I studied the photograph. The woman's face wasn't familiar, but her presence lingered. Not staged, not casual. There was a tension in her stance, like she'd been halfway through a sentence when someone called her name. "Postmarked Piraeus," I said, flipping the envelope. "That's the port outside Athens." "I am aware," Wolfe murmured. "She mailed it to you, not me. You live here." She didn't sign it with a full name, just L. That mean anything to you? I do not speculate in riddles, Mr. Goodwin, nor do I assign value to unsolicited, cryptic correspondence. You think it's a hoax? I think... Wolfe picked up a spray nozzle and misted the roots of a Paphiopedilum. "It is an interruption." Fritz would have winced at that, but I wasn't so delicate. "She looks American. The coat, the shoes." Wolfe didn't answer. I set the photo upright on a clay pot. The woman's eyes looked off-frame, as if someone stood beside the photographer, or had just left. "She lied," I said, "but she wants someone to know it." Wolfe turned finally. "Your need to find a case in every envelope is juvenile. That's my charm." He placed the nozzle back on its hook and returned to the photograph. For a moment he examined the handwriting. His brow furrowed slightly. "That is not a native Greek hand," he said. "No? Looks careful to me." "Too careful. School-taught cursive. American. East Coast." "You get that from 2 lines and a first initial?" "I get that from 50 years in a library." There was a pause. Not silence, but something like it. The misting system hissed behind us. Below, I heard Fritz move a pan off the stove. I said, "Could be connected to a case you turned down, or a client who never showed. Maybe someone who changed her mind. Or someone who needs attention. You've never met a liar you didn't want to trap, Wolfe." He didn't respond. But he didn't dismiss the photo either. Instead, he took the envelope, photograph, and returned to his chair, the yellow one, of course, and lowered himself into it like a court judge seating himself for a verdict that would not end in applause. He set the items on the side table, not in the wastebasket. That was progress. I remained standing. I could make a few calls, I offered. Ask around. See if anyone in the Greek consulate remembers a passenger ship, maybe a diplomatic vessel. Someone with that face. You could. You want me to? I want silence for 1 hour. I smiled. Silence buys you 30 minutes. Wolfe gave me a look, one that said he was deciding whether I was more tolerable moving or sitting still. I exited with a little more spring than necessary and made my way back downstairs. In the front room I poured myself half a coffee, Fritz's blend, which I didn't deserve but took anyway, and opened the drawer where we kept the address book. There was something about that photograph, not just the message was bait, but the angle, the way her fingers curled over the ship's railing. It reminded me of a snapshot I'd seen once buried in a case file Wolfe had refused to burn. I flipped through the drawer. Nothing under L, naturally. No surname, no last initial. But in the bottom of the envelope, tucked behind the photo, was something I'd missed the first time. A second piece of paper. Unfolded, it was a customs declaration, dated 3 weeks prior. The name listed Lydia Varelli. Destination, Manhattan, NY. Occupation, translator. There was no address. I carried it back upstairs. Wolfe was back among the orchids, eyes narrowed at something green and expensive. I held the paper out, silent. He read it, then placed it on the table beside the photograph. Lydia Varelli, he said. Yes. He said nothing for a long moment, then, find out who signed her in. If she docked in New York, someone met her. You're in? I am curious. That is not the same thing. But it was. For Wolfe, curiosity meant he'd already begun stacking facts in his mind like library books, alphabetized, sorted, and waiting for a thread to tie them together. I tucked the customs form into my coat pocket and headed for the door. At the last second, I turned and asked, "What if she's dead?" Wolfe didn't look up. "Then she's a poor liar," he said, "and we are already too late." By 11:30, the autumn light had begun to lose its struggle against the clouds, and Manhattan looked like it hadn't been warm in months. I was in the front room, filing nothing in particular, when the doorbell rang. I answered it, because Fritz wouldn't. Not under any circumstance short of fire or Fritz's own funeral. The woman standing on the porch was dressed in navy wool, tailored sharp through the shoulders. She wore gloves, real ones, dark leather with faint stitching at the wrist. Her veil, a fine blue mesh, framed her face like a mystery that didn't need solving, only listening to. "Miss Lucinda Corrales?" I asked. She gave the barest nod. "I'm Archie Goodwin. You're expected." She followed me in without a word. She didn't ask to remove her coat. She didn't ask anything. Her shoes were practical, low heels, polished, and they made no sound on the runner as she moved past the hat stand. I led her through the hall, past the grandfather clock and into the office where Wolfe was already seated in the yellow chair, dome-like, unbothered by the world. Lucinda didn't look at him immediately. Her eyes went to the room instead, the shelves, the globe, the orchids by the window, and only then settled on the man who would be deciding whether her grief merited deduction. Wolfe inclined his head. "Miss Corrales." She sat in one of the red chairs, not the one closest to Wolfe, the one across from me. "My sister is dead," she said. No preamble, no polite agony, just the statement, clean and worn, as if she'd already said it many times and gotten nothing back that helped. "I'm sorry," Wolfe replied. "I don't think it was an accident." He waited. So did I. Lucinda pulled off her gloves and folded them on her lap. "Her name was Lila Corrales," she said. "We're first-generation Greek-American. She was 29, bright, restless, a translator for the State Department, freelance mostly. She'd just completed a contract in Athens and was returning to New York. She reached into her handbag and drew out an envelope. Inside, a postcard, sepia-toned, frayed at the edges. I recognized it before she said anything more. It matched the photograph we'd received. The same deck rail, the same woman, this time turned slightly more, her scarf caught in the wind. No message on the back this time, just the name of the steamer, Hellas Star, printed in faded ink. "She mailed that to me," Lucinda said, 4 days before she died." Wolfe took it with his fingertips and set it beside the one we had already received. "She died aboard the Hellas Star?" he asked. Lucinda nodded. "On the last night of the voyage. The official report says she slipped on the upper deck during a storm. No witnesses. Her body was recovered, but there was no autopsy." "And you doubt this?" "I received another postcard," she said. This one she did not hand over. She kept it inside her purse, her fingers resting just against it, like a secret she hadn't decided to share. "It came a week later," she said, "postmarked from Piraeus again. No name, no photo, just 5 words." She paused. "Do not believe the accident." Wolfe leaned back, his eyes narrowed, but not from suspicion. "You have this card?" "I didn't bring it." "Why?" "Because it makes me sound mad." "You are not mad," Wolfe said. Lucinda sat straighter. "Thank you." Wolfe tapped the arm of his chair once. "Did your sister know she was in danger?" Lucinda hesitated. She never said, but Lila didn't fear danger. She sought it sometimes, not foolishly, deliberately. She chased puzzles, secrets. She was not indiscreet? She could be, but not recklessly, not unless she felt there was a truth behind it. Wolfe shifted. "And you wish me to investigate a possible murder," he said, "on a ship currently thousands of miles from my doorstep." Lucinda's chin lifted. "I'm not asking you to chase ghosts across the Atlantic, only to tell me whether the lie I was sent is one I should live with." Wolfe's gaze dropped to the photograph. He reached for the envelope that had arrived the day before, the one addressed to him. I passed it to Lucinda. She opened it, read the back of the photo, and went pale in a way that had nothing to do with the weather outside. She swallowed. "That's her handwriting." "Certain?" "I'd recognize it anywhere." "Then your sister sent this to me." "She didn't know you." "She does now," I muttered. Wolfe ignored me. He lifted the photo with care and examined it again. The message was direct. 5 words, a first initial, a small bend in the lower corner where it had been handled too long. "I lied about everything," Wolfe said aloud. "What did she have to lie about?" Lucinda hesitated. "I don't know." "But something occurred to you just now." Lucinda's fingers tensed. She looked at the window. "There was a man," she said, "not a lover, a sponsor, American, government adjacent. They met during her time in Athens." She didn't name him. Wolfe didn't press. "She didn't trust him," Lucinda said. "But she worked with him anyway. She said it was important." "Did he come to New York?" "I don't know." I asked, "Do you know who else was aboard the Hellas Star?" Lucinda reached into her handbag once more and pulled out a folded sheet, an itinerary, printed, typed and smudged. 28 passengers, mostly diplomatic or academic staff, a few private donors, 1 archaeologist, 1 naval attaché, a professor from Columbia. "Any friends of your sister?" "She didn't name any." Wolfe steepled his fingers. "You believe one of these people killed your sister?" Lucinda didn't answer for a moment. Then, "Yes." Wolfe said nothing. Lucinda continued, "I know it may be nothing, that she may have fallen, that someone somewhere may have imagined the worst and sent me a warning out of guilt, or spite, or confusion." Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "But I don't believe it," she said. "And if there's a lie behind this, if someone hurt her, I'd rather know." Wolfe looked at me. I gave a small shrug. "We've taken cases with less to go on." "We have taken nothing with less to go on," Wolfe replied. But he was already thinking. That much was clear. Wolfe leaned back. "Very well." Lucinda exhaled, slow. Her shoulders dropped by 1/2 inch. "I accept," Wolfe said. "But be warned. I do not chase shadows. I uncover facts. If the facts are unpleasant or inconvenient, you may not thank me." "I don't want comfort," Lucinda said. "I want the truth." "You shall have what I find," he said. Lucinda nodded. "That's all I ask." She stood, straightened her coat, and slid her gloves back on with quiet grace. At the door she paused. She loved the sea, she said. Even as a child, she believed water told the truth faster than people did. I held the door open. Lucinda Corrales stepped out into the grey air without looking back. Wolfe was already halfway through the passenger list when I returned. He said, "You will begin with the naval attaché, Gilby Dane. Find out how long he's been stateside. And if he likes steamer decks on rainy nights. If he has anything to lose, Wolfe said. Men do not kill to preserve truth. They kill to preserve illusion. He looked at the 2 photographs side by side. One we had received. One she had. 2 truths, maybe, or 2 performances. Either way, we were no longer dealing with a lie alone. Now, we were dealing with someone's idea of justice, mailed second class from the other side of the world. By noon the next day, I'd collected enough fragments to make a mosaic. If not a masterpiece, then at least something Wolfe could frown at and dissect between meals. The Hellas Star, as it turned out, had a life before diplomatic cruises and embassy dinners. It had started as a cargo steamer in the late 20s, built in Baltimore, rusted through in Havana, salvaged by a Greek merchant family, and refitted after the war as a cross-Atlantic cultural mission vessel. That meant no shuffleboard, no shuffleboarders, and just enough velvet drapery to hide its original sins. According to records dug up by Saul Panzer, who had been bribed with coffee, no questions asked, the ship had completed 3 transits under the Greek-American Cultural Liaison Act. The last one had departed Piraeus with 28 registered passengers, 15 crew, and a collection of crates marked educational materials. Lucinda Corrales had provided a passenger list. Wolfe had stared at it for 20 minutes while I tried not to chew my pen. When he finally spoke, it wasn't to me. "Fritz," he called. Fritz appeared in the doorway like a man summoned from the ether. "Sir?" "Lamb, chops, 7, light crust, tarragon, and braised leeks and pilaf," Fritz finished, not smiling. Wolfe inclined his head. Fritz vanished. I stared. "That's your cue to speak," Wolfe said, eyes still on the list. I cleared my throat. "We've got 3 that stand out." "State them." "First, Dinos Avrikos. Greek-American, owns half of Blue Spear Shipping, multiple vessels, big political donor, ties to embassy fundraisers, travelled aboard the Hellas Star as a special sponsor of repatriation efforts." "Meaning he paid for a crate and got a stateroom," Wolfe said. "Exactly." "Next. Gilby Dane, Lieutenant Commander, Naval Attaché officially, Cultural Liaison unofficially, long face, crew cut, Harvard chin. Got back to New York the day after the Hellas Star docked. Filed a 2-week leave. Hasn't responded to 3 messages I left." Wolfe grunted. "Go on." Esther Colville, Columbia professor, teaches classical archaeology, has a minor reputation for fighting to repatriate stolen Greek antiquities, wrote 3 papers on Aegean grave looting. Her name's on 2 of the manifests as a consultant historian. She knew the Corrales girl? Unconfirmed, but both spoke Greek. Both were involved in cultural work, and both were on the same deck. Wolfe tapped his index finger against the list. I waited. Wolfe didn't just make sounds to fill a room. If he was thinking aloud, it was because his thoughts had cleared enough for daylight. "Avrakos is power," he said. "Dane is cover. Colville is conscience." He set the list aside and looked at me. "You said Lila Corrales was assisting an antiquities officer." "Right. One John Ferris, civilian advisor to the American Office for Cultural Preservation." "Present." "Not anymore." Wolfe's brow lifted. "Disappeared," I said. "Not in the cloak and dagger sense. Officially, he never returned with the ship. Records say he disembarked in Lisbon, but the embassy there has no record. He didn't board a connecting vessel, he didn't show up in New York. He's nowhere." Wolfe sat back. "Gone." "Vanished," I confirmed. "Dead?" "Unknown." Wolfe frowned. I added, "Lucinda said Lila wrote about working with Ferris. She said it was confidential, but that it mattered. She didn't explain further." Wolfe waved a hand. "Women rarely do." I ignored that and continued. "Here's what we've got," I said. "A missing cultural officer, a diplomat with no forwarding address, a rich man with Greek roots and a lot of untaxed ships, a professor who thinks every vase belongs back in Athens. And a dead woman," Wolfe added. "One with no autopsy, no witness, and no explanation. She fell overboard. That's the story." He gave me a look that made my coffee go cold. "Fine," I said. "That's the lie." Wolfe stood, an effort involving arms, elbows, and all the resolve of a siege engine in motion. He moved to the map on the far wall and pulled down the Greek archipelago overlay. The islands spread out in muted blue and parchment beige, thin borders curling like ink left to dry too long. "She died in these waters," he murmured. Dead in foreign waters, I said. He didn't comment on the phrase, but I could tell it lodged somewhere. I walked to his side. There's something else, but I said. I held up a page from the embassy archive Saul had forwarded. It was Ferris's personnel file, redacted of course and light on detail, but enough to learn that he had been under review, not for treason, not even for misconduct, for, and I quote, failure to maintain institutional boundaries between cultural assets and private collectors. Wolfe's expression darkened. Ferris was trading artifacts, he said, or guarding them too loosely, which would attract thieves, and maybe whistleblowers. Wolfe stepped back from the map. He returned to his chair, sat with a grunt and closed his eyes for a moment, not to sleep, to catalogue. When he opened them again, the air felt sharper. She saw something, Wolfe said. Lila? Yes. She shared it with Ferris? Or uncovered it because of him? And now he's missing. Yes, Wolfe said, but not by accident. Taken? Or fled? The distinction is not yet material. I sat down across from him. Red chair. Same angle Lucinda had taken. Do you want me to poke the professor? I asked. Yes, carefully. Colville doesn't strike me as the stabbing type. Then she is likely the bleeding type, I grimaced. Wolfe glanced at the list again. You will also find Mr. Avrakos. He's rich. He'll be harder. He's arrogant. He'll be louder. I reached for my notepad. Anything specific? Ask him what he brought back. Artifacts? Crates, documents, anything unlisted. You think the motive's cultural theft? I think theft is rarely cultural to the thief. I stood. And Dane? Later. Let us see what honesty can be extracted from academia before confronting uniformed indifference. I left the office with a clear list and an unclear conscience. Lucinda had given us a breadcrumb trail, dry, faint, and easy to miss. Now it was up to me to see whether those crumbs led to truth, to justice, or to another lie, salted and sealed and sent across the Atlantic, where corpses sink quieter than questions ever do. Tuesday dawned in ash tones and a drizzle that never quite became rain. Manhattan looked like a tired poker player, bluffing warmth with steam vents and overcoats. I had 3 names in my pocket and a flask in my coat, though only one of them was strictly necessary. Wolfe had circled the suspects with red ink and few illusions. My job was to shake their trees and see what fell out. I started uptown, where money sleeps behind doormen and smirks in elevators. Dinos of Rakos had a penthouse suite that overlooked the park like a sultan watching peasants rake sand. The man himself opened the door, which told me one of 2 things. Either he had no staff, or he liked making a point. Mr. Goodwin, he said, with a voice dipped in expensive scotch and rinsed in formality. I assume you're here for Nero Wolfe, I nodded, and for Lila Corrales. His face didn't flinch, not even by a muscle. Ah. He stepped aside and let me in. The place was polished. Walnut floors, silk drapes, and a scent of wood smoke that didn't come from any visible fire. Avrakos wore a grey 3-piece suit that didn't look like it had ever known sweat. I've already spoken with the authorities, he said, gesturing to a leather armchair. I didn't sit. This isn't official, I replied. It's personal. He raised an eyebrow. Yours? Her sister's. He considered me for a beat, then poured himself a drink. Neat. He didn't offer one. I liked Lila, he said, but I hardly knew her. You were on the same ship, as were 27 others. You funded the trip. I funded culture. The trip was incidental. She worked with the antiquities officer. Ferris? You knew him? Avrakos sipped. In the loosest sense. We shared a deck plan, that's all. Did you see Lila the night she died? His eyes stayed on mine. No. Were you in your cabin? He smiled faintly. I was in a conversation with 2 donors, champagne and a debate about Byzantine iconography. You can check with the purser. Already have. He's missing. His smile didn't waver. Then I suppose you'll have to take my word. I nodded, not writing anything down. Do you know what she was working on? He refilled his glass. Something sensitive. She said it required discretion. Did she name names? He shook his head. She wasn't the kind of woman who needed help being discreet. I let that hang a moment. Then, did she lie? Avrakos blinked once. About what? Anything. He looked past me toward the park. We all lie, Mr. Goodwin. It's the price of civility. That's one way to put it. I doubt you'll find answers in polite conversation. That's not what I'm looking for, he smiled. Then you're already ahead of the game. I left with nothing, and everything. He was hiding something. Maybe pride, maybe more. My next stop was the Roosevelt Club. Brass doors, red carpets, and a doorman who looked at me like I'd stolen his umbrella. Gilby Dane was inside, seated at a corner table with a newspaper, coffee, and a boredom cultivated over a long military career. "Lieutenant Commander," I greeted. "Mr. Goodwin, join me." He gestured to the seat across from him. I sat. He folded the paper and gave me a practiced smile. "I take it this is about the Hellas Star." "Among other things. I've submitted my report to the State Department. There's nothing classified in it, if that's what concerns you." "It's not." "Then what?" "Lila Corrales." The smile faded slightly. "A loss," he said. "Unfortunate." "You knew her?" "In passing." "You were seen entering her cabin." His fingers stiffened against the tablecloth. "By whom?" "Her journal." He nodded slowly. "I spoke with her," he admitted. "She had concerns about Ferris." "What kind?" He hesitated. "That he was playing both sides." "Who were the sides?" "Collectors, institutions. She didn't name names. Did you report it?" I filed an addendum. It was buried. "Why?" He leaned in. "Because, Mr. Goodwin, nobody in Washington wants another Greek scandal. Not now." "So she got left overboard." His jaw clenched. "I didn't kill her." "Can you prove that?" He didn't answer. "Where were you the night she died?" "In my cabin, reading." "Alone?" "Yes." "Convenient." He looked at me with something colder than anger. "If you're implying something, imply it clearly." "I'm implying guilt doesn't always come with blood on the hands." He pushed back his chair. "I liked her," he said. "She was smart, idealistic, but she asked questions that made people nervous." He dropped a $10 bill on the table and walked out. I didn't follow. The last name on my list lived in a brownstone on the Upper West Side, the academic kind with ivy in the windows and no lights on during the day. Esther Colville opened the door in a cardigan and gloves. Her hair was pinned back, but a strand had escaped near her ear. "I'm sorry to intrude," I said. "Archie Goodwin, Nero Wolfe's office." She looked at me like I was a book she'd forgotten how to read. "I suppose you'd better come in." The place smelled of paper, ink, and time. Books were everywhere, stacked on chairs, steps, windowsills. She led me to a study and cleared a seat with a flurry of apologies. I sat. "You knew Lila Corrales," I said. She nodded carefully. "She was helping John Ferris." "Yes." "What happened to him?" "I don't know." "What happened to her?" She folded her hands. "She found something," she said. "Something that didn't belong in any museum." "An artifact?" She shook her head. "A truth." "About what?" "About the hands that move history." "Names?" "I'd rather not." "That's not how this works." She stood and crossed to a drawer. After a moment she returned with a folded map. It was hand-marked, ink lines, Greek annotations, a few names in the margins. One circled twice. Chios. "She marked that before the voyage," Esther said. "Said it was a hinge point." "For what?" "For a decision." I took the map. "You believe she was murdered?" "I believe she was silenced." "By whom?" "By someone who feared her being heard." "That's not much of a name." "It's the only one I have." "Where were you the night she died?" "In my cabin." "With anyone?" "No." I nodded. She followed me to the door. "Mr. Goodwin?" "Yes?" "If you find the truth, be careful where you place it." "I always am." She smiled faintly. "No, you aren't. That's what makes you good at it." I returned to the brownstone at dusk. Wolfe was in the office, hands steepled, eyes shut. "Well," he said. Avrikos dodged. Dane deflected. Colville gave me a map. I laid it out on the table. He opened his eyes and leaned forward. 3 people, I said. No alibis, no clarity, just ghosts and shadows. Wolfe examined the map. She circled Chios. "Meaning?" "Possibly nothing. Possibly everything." I waited. Wolfe tapped the table. None of them are clean, he said. That was my impression. But one of them is afraid. Which? He looked at me. That, Mr. Goodwin, is what you will now find out. Fog curled along the East River like a pickpocket in a church, quiet, unwelcome, and never quite gone. By the time I reached Pier 9, the waterfront smelled of diesel, rust, and the kind of secrets that clung to shipping manifests and the underside of deck boots. The Hellas Star had come and gone, but her shadow lingered. The porters were on break, clustered around their cards and tin mugs of something hot. One of them, short, lean, grey across the temples, had eyes that had seen things and a mouth that didn't bother much with adjectives. He looked up as I approached, already wary. I gave him my name, my license, and the name of the ship. Yeah, he said, remember it. Lot of noise. Not noise, just fog, real thick that morning. You unload her? He nodded. 3 holds plus diplomatic freight. Took 6 hours. You see the passengers? Some. I pulled out the photo of Lila. Her? He squinted. No, don't think so. I tried a different route. You remember anyone leave early? His brow furrowed. Yeah, one. Describe him. Greek, or maybe Turkish. Sharp coat, brown, real fine stitch. Didn't have no bags. No luggage? He shook his head. Just an envelope, big one, manila, thick, had some stamp on it, red letters. Could you read it? US documents, it said. Time of day? Way before customs, maybe 4:30. Sky wasn't even pink yet. You sure he came off the Hellas Star? Watched him myself. Walked straight off the gangplank like he owned the tide. Anyone else notice? Doc Watch waved him through. That normal? He gave me a look. What do you think? That was all I needed. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was mid-discussion with Fritz over garlic ratios when I barged in. You're interrupting, Wolfe said without looking up. This may be worth it, he sighed. Then proceed. I recounted the porter's story. Wolfe listened, frowning more at the pacing than the content. No luggage, he said. None. Envelope? Stamped US documents. Left the ship hours before official clearance. Wolfe rubbed his chin. You traced him? Not yet, but I've got a description. Then do. He gestured to the door. I left before he added anything with spice. The trail wasn't fresh, but it wasn't frozen. A contact in the harbour registry led me to a security log. One name popped up in the early AM offload list. T. Marinos. I chewed it for a bit. Theo Marinos. The embassy had a contractor by that name, Greek-born, naturalised in Brooklyn. Worked part-time as a freelance translator. Hopped between the consulate, NYU's classics department, and private archival collections. According to his file, he'd been aboard the Hellas Star as a temporary language assistant. No return documentation, no follow-up, just a stamp and a silence. I checked 2 campus offices. One hadn't seen him in weeks. The other said he'd called once to reschedule a lecture on Minoan script, then never showed. The woman who told me that had a sad mouth and eyes that didn't blink enough. She called him charming and careful. I asked if he was the kind to vanish. She said, only when it mattered. By dusk, I'd run out of sidewalks. I returned to Wolfe with a report in full and an expression that matched the coffee Fritz handed me. Wolfe listened. He frowned. Then, worst of all, he sighed. You think it's a lead, he said. I think it's embroidery. He left the ship early, I said. He had US documents. He hasn't been seen since. Perhaps he found the ferry schedule offensive. Wolfe, he closed the file. If you wish to chase ghosts, do so, but ghosts do not answer subpoenas. He could have seen something. Or fled from nothing. I stood. You're not curious? I'm always curious, but not always compelled. I left before I could say something dumb. The next day, Saul confirmed that Theo Marinos hadn't returned to any of his usual haunts. Apartment, empty, mail piling, no forwarding address. His last known contact was a professor at the Greek Orthodox Seminary on 74th. I went. The man who opened the church office door was pale, slow, and reminded me of wet marble, beautiful once, now used to cold. He introduced himself as Father Kyriakos. I introduced myself as an investigator. At the name Marinos, he bowed his head. I know him, he said. Knew him. Past tense? He came to confession the day after the ship arrived. What did he confess? The priest gave me the smallest of frowns. Nothing I can repeat. Then let me guess. He saw something? Kyriakos said nothing. Did he seem frightened? Yes. Guilty? Yes. Of what? That, said the priest. I was not told. I left him in the incense and shadows. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe barely glanced up from his beer. Found your man? He asked. Not quite. Alive? Unclear. You're wasting your time. Maybe. I dropped the logbook, the photograph, and the professor's report on his desk. You still think this is embroidery? I think, Wolfe said. It's a red herring with a fine coat. But he's missing. Yes. Which means something. Possibly, but not necessarily what you want it to mean. Meaning? Meaning, Wolfe said. There are 1,000 men with coats and papers. Find the one with blood on his hands. Then we may talk. It was one of those afternoons when the brownstone held its breath. Outside, rain slipped between buildings in streaks too lazy to fall straight, while inside, the warmth of Fritz's kitchen declared war against Manhattan's damp gloom. I was in the front room sorting paper clips, an occupation with all the dignity of chasing pigeons, when I smelled rosemary and garlic drifting up the hall. I followed it. Not for food. Wolfe had barred me from the afternoon tasting due to what he called reckless sarcasm. But because when Fritz cooked for someone other than Wolfe, it usually meant something interesting. Lucinda Corrales sat at the kitchen table, posture neat, hands folded over a linen napkin. She wore a deep plum blouse and a pair of tortoise-shell earrings that caught the light when she turned her head to thank Fritz for the small plate of grilled eggplant he'd just served. I lingered in the doorway. You're early, Fritz said without turning around. I'm not interrupting. You are, but that's usual. Lucinda smiled faintly. He told me you'd arrive before the basil. I stepped into the room. Fritz gestured at the stove. Sit, but speak only after you smell the oil. I took a stool and leaned in. He uncorked a bottle, poured a small pool of green gold olive oil into a silver spoon, and held it beneath my nose. It was floral, peppery, and alive. It smelled like the hills in stories about cities older than sin. Lucinda said, That's from Thessaly. Lila used to send bottles every winter. Claimed it tasted better if she smuggled it. I asked, Did she smuggle anything else? Lucinda's expression changed. Not a wince, not quite a memory. Something between. She mailed me something strange about a month before she died. It was small, wrapped in a handkerchief, tucked inside a book on Homeric epithets. I sat straighter. What kind of something? Fritz stopped moving. A coin, she said. Bronze, about the size of a nickel. Worn. Greek letters, but not in any standard pattern. I looked it up. Couldn't find it in any reference catalogues. Wolfe's voice came from behind me. You didn't mention this before. Lucinda blinked. I thought it was just a keepsake, an oddity. He entered the kitchen, not quickly. Wolfe never moved quickly, but with all the momentum of an incoming verdict. Describe it again. She did. Wolfe listened with the kind of attention usually reserved for veal stock reductions. Do you have it? He asked. Lucinda looked uncomfortable. No. Where is it? I don't know. Wolfe scowled. Miss Corrales, that is unacceptable. I kept it in a drawer beside my bed. Then I forgot about it. I only remembered it when you mentioned Thessaly. When did you last see it? 2 weeks ago, maybe more. Wolfe folded his arms. Who has been in your home since then? She hesitated. Only one person. Name. Professor Esther Colville. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Why? She came for lunch. Fritz raised an eyebrow. She requested lemon tart. Lucinda nodded. She said she'd read about it in an old recipe pamphlet. She was insistent. Wolfe said she was looking for an excuse. Lucinda's lips parted, but she didn't speak. Fritz asked, Do you suspect she took it? I don't know, Lucinda said. But the next day, it was gone. Wolfe turned to me. Mr. Goodwin. Yes, sir. You will retrieve a description of the coin. You will consult the Metropolitan's Antiquities Registrar. You will determine whether this item exists in any known inventory. And if it doesn't, then we have found our motive. Lucinda said, You think she killed my sister over a coin? I think, Wolfe said, she killed for what it represented. Fritz placed a linen cloth over the plate. You should not eat when the truth has just gone cold. Wolfe grunted in agreement. I reached for my hat. Lucinda asked, "Why would she want it?" Wolfe replied, "Because it may not be a coin." She stared. He continued, "It may be a key, a seal, a cipher, a forgery, or it may be priceless. Either way, it threatened someone." I left the kitchen before the oil cooled. At the Metropolitan Museum's side entrance, I met an old contact named Vickery. He had thinning hair, dry hands, and the kind of distracted authority reserved for men who thought in dynasties instead of years. I showed him my sketch based on Lucinda's description: a round coin, 5-pointed star, partial inscription around the edge. He frowned and took it to the back without comment. 20 minutes later, he returned. "Closest match we have is a Mycenaean trade token," he said. "But yours, if it's real, has no recorded provenance." "Worth anything?" he chuckled. "If authentic, quite a lot. But more than that, it would be an embarrassment." "How so?" "It would imply that a major excavation missed something, or worse, that someone smuggled a piece out before it could be catalogued. And if it was stolen? Then it doesn't belong in a drawer." Back at the brownstone, Wolfe sat in silence as I gave him the news. When I finished, he nodded once. "Miss Colville has academic access to 4 museums. She also wrote a paper 3 years ago criticising the British Museum for its role in cultural laundering." "She wouldn't sell it," I said. "No," Wolfe replied, "she would use it." "As leverage? As proof? As vindication? Or as a final thesis?" "What about the message?" Wolfe looked up. "She mailed the coin weeks before she died. She wrote, 'I lied about everything.'" "Yes. She meant the coin." "No." Wolfe paused. "She meant why she had it." He rose, slow and deliberate. "Archie." "Yes." "Call the professor." "Colville?" "Yes." "Invite her for tea." "What time?" He checked the clock. 3 hours from now." "Very good. Fritz will bake. Should I prepare the handcuffs?" Wolfe smiled. "Not yet, but dust them." As I turned, he added, "Also, bring back the photograph." I stopped. "Which one?" "The one from the envelope. The shipboard one." "Yes." "Why?" "Because," Wolfe said, "I suspect Miss Colville knows who took it. And if she doesn't, then she knows who mailed it." I left the room. Behind me, Fritz set the oven. Wolfe closed his eyes, and outside the rain finally started to fall like it meant it. It was just past 6 when the knock came. Not the polite rap of a client, or the sheepish thud of a courier. This knock had backbone, steel, a badge behind it. I opened the door, knowing who it would be before I turned the knob. Inspector Kramer filled the threshold like a man who'd never once doubted he belonged there. His coat was wet, his face was worse, and in his left hand he carried a folded sheaf of paper that looked like it wanted trouble. "Archie," he said. "Inspector." "Is he in?" "He's not out." Kramer stepped in, dripping authority and rain in equal measure. I led him to the office without further ceremony. Wolfe looked up from his chair, the yellow one naturally, and didn't stand. He never did. The orchids had gone back upstairs, replaced now with a map of the Aegean and a glass of watered-down beer. Fritz must have surrendered early. "Kramer," Wolfe said, as if he'd ordered him from a catalogue. Kramer didn't smile. He dropped the papers onto Wolfe's desk. "Esther Colville," he said. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "Found in her study 30 minutes ago," Kramer said. "Unconscious. Paramedics say phenobarbital, dosage heavy, almost fatal." Wolfe did not blink. "Suicide?" "That's what the note says." Wolfe picked up the papers, flipped through them, and frowned. I leaned over his shoulder. The note was handwritten, neat, unsigned. "There are things the world is not ready for. I thought I could control the truth. I failed. I am sorry." Kramer grunted. "Tidy, isn't it?" Wolfe said nothing. "She's still alive," Kramer added. "Hospital, sedated." "Who found her?" "Neighbour. Heard music playing for hours. Knocked, no answer. Window was cracked, called it in." "And the door?" "Locked from the inside." Wolfe tapped the letter. "She didn't write this." Kramer scowled. "You've got that tone again." "I have a mind, Inspector. It comes equipped." "Then use it to cooperate, for once." "I am cooperating," Wolfe said. I am telling you this note is staged. Kramer folded his arms. On what basis? The style is too formal. The word control implies scientific detachment. Colville was a romantic. She would have said carry or protect. The phrase not ready for is bureaucratic, not academic, not personal. Handwriting matches. I did not say she didn't write it. I said she didn't compose it. Kramer turned to me. Goodwin, you agree with this? I shrugged. She was spooked when I saw her. She wasn't unravelling, she was watching her steps. Wolfe set the letter down. You will find no fingerprints. On the glass? On anything. Whoever staged this wore gloves. Kramer paced once, twice. She was scared, I said. The coin's gone. The Corrales girl mailed it to her sister. Colville was the last one to see it. She was the last one to admit it, Wolfe corrected. Kramer stopped. You think someone tried to kill her? Yes. Anyone in mind? Wolfe leaned back, eyes half closed. You interviewed Dane, he said. He's military, disciplined and cornered. Kramer muttered. So are rats. Precisely, Wolfe said. You'll find his name somewhere on Colville's correspondence. I've got a warrant, Kramer said. I'll use it. Wolfe lifted his glass. Good. Then begin with her typewriter and her wastebasket. Kramer took the letter, tucked it back into his coat, and turned toward the door, but he paused at the threshold. I don't like being told how to read a suicide, he said. Wolfe replied, Then stop reading fictions. When the door shut, Wolfe exhaled once and pressed his fingers together. I said, You're sure it was a plant? Yes. And not panic? She is not a coward. She was silenced. I poured myself a short one. She's not dead. Wolfe grunted. Yet. Think they'll try again? He nodded. Then we'd better move first. Wolfe didn't answer. He reached for the map. She circled Chios, he said. Yes. He tapped it once. There lies the origin, but here, he pointed to Manhattan, is where it ends. He reached for the phone. Whom are you calling? Lucinda Corrales, he said, before someone sends her a letter too. By the time I reached Professor Colville's building, the sky had bruised to a colour somewhere between lead and regret. It wasn't late, but the day had exhausted itself trying to hold the sun in place, and now the shadows had taken over like they always did in this town. I wore gloves, not because it was cold, but because I was about to commit what the New York Penal Code would call unlawful entry, and what Wolfe would call research. The brownstone on Riverside was under watch, but only barely. Kramer had posted a uniform on the street, more for ceremony than security. I waited half a block up, watched the beat cop light a cigarette, and cross behind him when he turned toward traffic. Colville's side alley was narrow, full of trash bins, ivy, and a drain pipe just rusted enough to hold a grudge. The kitchen window, once again, was cracked, a relic of city living. I jimmied the latch with a pocket tool Saul had once gifted me after a job in Brooklyn, and slid it open just wide enough for a man who eats Fritz's cooking, but walks everywhere. Inside, the apartment smelled like lavender and floor wax, and something else. The flat hush of a place recently disturbed, then rapidly evacuated. The air had the weight of unspoken things. A radio on low muttered symphony into the corner. I stayed still for a moment, listening. Silence, then movement. Floorboards settling, or memory echoing. I walked softly past the kitchen and into the study. The overhead light was off. A table lamp burned dim beside a stack of books that hadn't been straightened in a while. The chair, I noted, was angled slightly away from the desk, as if someone had been interrupted mid-thought, or had turned to answer a knock that never came. On the desk sat a glass of water, half full. The men's handkerchief next to it was oddly folded, too precisely. I didn't touch it. Wolfe had drilled that into me. If you disturb a scene, make it better, not worse. The desk drawers were unlocked. Third one down, back of the left side, held a manila envelope. Inside, several creased foreign-printed forms, a stamped receipt from the National Archaeological Museum of Athens, and a letter in Greek. I couldn't translate all of it. My grasp on Greek was mostly limited to food menus and profanity, but I recognized a few key terms: artifact, registry number, Chios excavation, Ferris. That was enough to earn its ride home. I opened the bottom drawer and found what I hadn't expected. A plaster mould, a crude, flat, ringed with a circular impression. The inner cavity matched in shape and size the bronze coin Lucinda had described. Around the edge were shallow scratches, Greek letters, carved not by centuries but by human hands, a forgery mould, handmade. I held it a moment. It was heavy, clumsy, the kind of thing a scholar might make to prove a point, or someone might use to make a lie. That meant the coin sent to Lucinda was fake, and the original, gone. I wrapped the mould in a hand towel from the bathroom, placed the Greek papers back in the envelope, and slipped out the way I came in, cleaner than I had entered, but heavier by 3 truths and a theory. By the time I got back to the brownstone, Fritz had retired for the evening, and Wolfe was finishing his bottle of beer like a man who believed hydration was an art form. I dropped the towel and envelope on his desk and waited. He didn't speak for a while. Then, explain. I did, step by step. When I finished, he leaned back, eyes narrowed like the coin itself was balanced between his eyebrows. So, he said, the coin in Lucinda's drawer was a reproduction. Yes. And the original? Missing, which implies theft. Or preemptive protection. He nodded once. The motive is no longer abstract, he said. It is material, monetary, possibly national. I handed him the museum paper. Look at the name in the 3rd paragraph. He squinted, adjusted his glasses and grunted. Ferris. Right. Which confirms his involvement. Or authorship. Wolfe tapped the desk once. Ferris forged the coin, or supervised it, and then disappeared. Yes. He poured himself a new glass of beer and didn't drink it. The implications, he said, are complicated. Try me. If Ferris created a forgery, then he was preparing to deceive someone, a collector, an institution, a government, or hide the truth, which means Lila discovered the original and mailed a fake to her sister. Wolfe nodded. To protect the real one. But someone realized the switch. Yes. And that's why she died. Wolfe raised his glass in silence. I asked, who had the most to lose? He didn't answer right away. Then, not Colville. She believed in preservation, not profit. Avrakos? Possible, but he is too public, too exposed. Dane? Wolfe's eyes darkened. Military protocol, diplomatic immunity. If he smuggled it, it was for leverage. Which means, Wolfe held up a hand. No speculation, he said. Not until I've seen the letter again. He opened the envelope and read through the Greek document line by line, his brow furrowed. This, he said slowly, is not a customs receipt. I waited. It is a repatriation declaration. Meaning? Meaning, Wolfe said. This coin was scheduled to be returned to Greece, but someone stopped it, or replaced it with the forgery. And Lila found out. He set the paper down. It's political now, he said. I muttered. That's when it gets ugly. No, Wolfe said. That's when it gets official. He reached for the phone. Whom are you calling? Kramer. At this hour? He'll want to know what's missing before someone else decides to return it. I left the room, let Fritz know we'd need breakfast early, and closed the office door behind me. In the study, under low light, the mould sat on Wolfe's desk like a confession made of dust. The bronze wasn't buried, it had been copied, and whoever had the real one wasn't finished lying. Midtown in November smells like diesel and lost appointments. By the time I reached the boarding house, the rain had turned to mist, clinging to hat brims and false promises. The place was called the Hartford Arms, a name that suggested marble lobbies and crisp linens, but delivered creaking stairwells, chipped paint, and a landlady with eyes like chipped coal. She didn't smile when I showed my credentials, but she didn't slam the door either. He paid 2 weeks in advance, she said. Name was Anthony Lefkos. Quiet, Greek, I think. Came in late, always wore gloves. Room 603. Still here? Her silence told me before her nod did. I followed her up 6 floors of sagging carpet and peeled wallpaper. She handed me the key like it had burned her fingers. Police have been called, she said. I'm not them. That's why I opened the door. She left without further ceremony. I stood alone in the hall and unlocked the room. Theo Marinos was dead. He lay on the floor beside the radiator, one arm across his chest, the other curled beside a broken lamp. There was no sign of violence, not the messy kind, but the expression on his face said he'd seen something that deserved a scream. I didn't touch him. The room was a poor man's palace. Iron bed, one chair, a dresser with a missing knob, and a single suitcase beneath the sink. I opened it. Clothes neatly folded, a shaving kit, one fountain pen, no photographs, no papers. But on the windowsill sat a stub of candle burnt low, and next to it a copper button, naval issue. I made a mental note, then I checked the floorboards. The third one near the bed had a scratch where the heel had worn away the varnish. I pried it up using my wallet knife. Inside was a cloth parcel, thick, wrapped tight in string. I opened it. Inside, a black leather notebook, and a stack of photographs. Lila's name was written on the inside cover of the journal, in ink that had faded only slightly. The pages were dense, written in block script filled with notations, times, deck layouts, and small hand-drawn arrows. She had been documenting everything. Page 14. Ferris handed off a parcel mid-voyage. Unrecorded exchange. Envelope had museum seal, not American. Page 19. Spoke with Colville, she suspects. Said, if this ever reaches the press, careers will fall like columns. Page 23. Dane asked about the coin. I lied. Said I sent it to Athens. He looked relieved. Page 27. I no longer believe this is just about smuggling. Something older is at play. The photos were black and white, grainy but sharp where it counted. Steamer deck, night lighting, corridor shots. One showed Ferris speaking with someone out of frame. Another showed Lila, coat over her shoulders, standing near the railing. The final photo froze my breath. Room corridor. Timestamp scratched on the back. 3:12 a.m. In the centre of the frame, Gilby Dane stepping into Colville's cabin. Her door bore the same number as before, C7. According to her own statement, and every record since, she had been asleep by 10. I packed the journal and the photos and left the room untouched, locking the door behind me. Wolfe was waiting in the office when I returned. He didn't ask if I'd found Marinos. He only asked, was it clean? As clean as a lie dressed in silence. I laid the journal down. He opened it, read half a page, then set it aside. He turned to the photographs. He held the one of Dane longer than the others. This, he said, will not please the inspector. It's not meant to. He tapped the photo. He lied. Yes. So did she. I nodded. Room C7, Wolfe said. That puts them 6 doors from the communications steward. You think someone else saw them? I think it is likely. Do we tell Kramer? Yes. He didn't say more. I sat. He kept it under the floor, which means he was afraid, or knew something worth burying. The coin? No. The truth? Wolfe turned to the window. Call Lucinda, he said. Now? Yes. She needs to see it? She needs to know what her sister died for. I rose. Before I reached the door, Wolfe added, and Archie? Yes. Find Dane. Alive? If possible. And if not? Then the case is nearly closed. I stepped into the hall, coat over my arm, camera in my pocket. The photo of Dane in room C7 burned a square in my chest the whole way there. It was late, well past the hour Wolfe tolerated guests, telephone calls, or thinking that involved perspiration. Yet there he sat in the yellow chair, still in shirt sleeves, the collar stiff but unbuttoned, the map of the Aegean folded beside his thigh like a worn telegram. The air was heavy with the scent of citrus. Fritz had polished the wood with lemon oil again, and somewhere beyond the window, Manhattan exhaled a long, low fog into the night. I stood by the drinks tray, ice melting in a glass I hadn't yet raised. Wolfe hadn't spoken in 5 minutes, which meant he was either crafting a conclusion or rehearsing an indictment. I didn't interrupt either one. Finally he spoke. 3 motives, he said. Greed, fear, and the preservation of national interest. I nodded. You're ready then? No, he said. I am resolved. That is different. He rose slowly, every gesture deliberate. Wolfe rarely moved unless compelled by food, fury, or revelation. This was the third. Begin with Lila, he said. She was no fool. Agreed. She discovered the original coin, not merely stumbled upon it, but recognized its value, its provenance. She knew it belonged to Greece, and she knew someone, or some group, intended to keep it from going back. She told Colville. Yes, because Colville was the only one who would care. He began pacing, a short path, 3 steps forward, pivot 3 steps back, as far as Wolfe ever marched. Colville, for all her faults, believed in principle, he said. She saw the coin not as a commodity, but as truth. So, she tried to protect Lila. No, Wolfe said. She tried to protect the coin. Protecting Lila was the consequence, not the goal. I lowered myself into the red chair, the good one. Go on. Enter Dane, Wolfe said. A military man, educated, controlled, and utterly beholden to the silence of diplomacy. He knew. Yes, Lila told him, or perhaps he discovered it on his own. Either way, he knew she had the real coin, and that she was documenting everything. The journal, I said. Precisely. She wasn't merely a translator, she was a witness, and he needed to erase the record. I took a long pull from my glass. So he pushed her? No, Wolfe said. He arranged for an opportunity. A storm, a slippery deck, a private corridor. He ensured no one saw her fall, and ensured her story would never be told. But it was, I said. To Theo Marinos. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Yes, the ghost in room 603. He was a translator, I said. She trusted him. And she was right to, but he ran. Why? Because Dane found out he had the journal. And killed him? Wolfe stopped pacing. No, he followed him. Let him panic. Let him hide, and then, when he was certain the journal was irretrievable, only then did he act. To silence Colville. Yes, I exhaled. The logic was tight. Too tight. But why not just steal the coin and be done with it? Because, Wolfe said, the coin was never the end. It was the beginning, a token, a thread. Pull it, and everything unravels. Ferris's disappearance, Avrikos's involvement, the museum's complicity, perhaps even the government's. That's why Kramer's quiet. Yes. Wolfe returned to his chair and sat, not heavily, but with the gravity of conclusion. Colville didn't poison herself, he said. No. She confronted Dane. She accused him? Likely, Wolfe said. She may have even threatened to go public. And he staged the suicide. Wolfe nodded once. She lived because he miscalculated the dosage. I finished my drink. So where does that leave us? Wolfe folded his hands over his stomach. With a motive that is no longer personal, he said. It is political. I stood. Then the question is, who's protecting Dane? Or who stands to fall if he does? The room fell quiet again. Wolfe closed his eyes. Call Lucinda in the morning. To do what? To tell her what her sister died for. And then? And then, Wolfe said, we invite our guests to tea. You're ready for the confrontation? I am, he said, but they are not. I turned off the lamp. The citrus still hung in the air. Outside, the fog thickened. Inside, the truth was sharp as lemon on the tongue. There are rules about meeting a suspect alone. Wolfe has them etched into his doctrine, usually filed somewhere between never open the front door and don't speak to a man who uses too many adverbs. But I wasn't following doctrine that afternoon. I was following Gilby Dane. The invitation had been clear, a handwritten note delivered by courier to the brownstone just past noon. Dane had requested a private conversation at the Naval Club on Lexington, 4 p.m. sharp, to clarify matters pertaining to Miss Corrales and recent insinuations. It was signed in thick black ink, with the deliberate sharpness of a man used to writing orders instead of requests. I showed it to Wolfe. He read it once, pursed his lips and said, No. Why not? I asked. Because it smells like bait. I've been hungry all week. You'll go, he said, but you'll leave your notebook here. That gave me pause. Wolfe, you'll memorize your questions. If you return, I'll transcribe them from memory. If you don't, I'll know the contents weren't worth retrieving. I left the notebook on the desk and caught a cab. The Naval Club was as I remembered it. Walls of walnut panelling, brass lamps that gave off more authority than light, and a coat-check man who could spot civilians with one blink. I gave my name, adjusted my tie, and waited in the lounge. Dane arrived 5 minutes late, clean-shaven, pressed, precise. He wore a grey uniform and the expression of someone performing civility because the war hadn't yet resumed. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, offering a gloved hand. "Lieutenant?" We sat in a booth beneath a painting of a destroyer carving through an idealized sea. The waitress brought rye whiskey without asking. I watched him raise his glass. "To clarity," he said. I didn't drink yet. "Why the secrecy?" I asked. He shrugged. "Because you're no longer asking questions as a civilian." "Wolfe is a complication," he finished, "but not a deterrent." "Then let's be blunt." He leaned back. "Please." "Lila knew about the coin. She told someone. She died." He blinked slowly. "That's your sequence?" "No, that's her obituary." He picked up his glass again. "She was foolish," he said. "She wanted the truth without understanding what truth costs." "She mailed a forgery." "Yes." "Someone found out." "Yes." "Was it you?" He smiled faintly. "Truthfully, Mr. Goodwin, I don't remember. I drank then, only a sip, but the taste was wrong, too sweet, too smooth. I set the glass down. He didn't." "Where's Ferris?" I asked. He tilted his head. "What makes you think I know?" "You were the last to see him." "No," he said. "He was the last to see me." There was something in the room now, a tilt, not in the lighting, in me. My vision bent at the corners. The chandelier above us stretched in slow motion. I blinked twice, hard. "Something the matter?" Dane asked. "What did you put in it?" He smiled again. "Not enough to kill you." "Then what?" "Enough to teach you something." He rose. I tried to stand. My knees failed. "You should sleep now," he said. "Your memory will remain, but your notebook won't." He turned and walked away. The room folded sideways. I reached for the edge of the booth. Someone laughed nearby, not at me, just at something else, but it sounded like an echo, then black. The next thing I knew, I was lying on damp pavement. The alley was narrow, lit only by the distant hum of a street lamp filtered through fire escapes and steam. My coat was gone. So was my watch. My wallet was still there, almost disappointingly. A trash can had broken my fall or softened it. My ribs ached like they'd argued with concrete. I staggered to my feet, hands numb. My notebook was gone. Not the one Wolfe made me leave, the backup I carried in my coat. With my shorthand, the Dane photograph, Lila's journal summaries. Gone. I hailed a cab with hands that barely moved and arrived at the brownstone just shy of midnight. Fritz opened the door. I must have looked worse than I felt, because he didn't ask questions. He just moved aside. Wolfe was waiting. I stepped into the office. He stared. I said, "You were right." He didn't gloat. He never gloated when blood was involved. "Sit," he said. I did. He poured me a drink and placed it on the desk. I told him everything, from the club to the alley. When I finished, he said, "Describe the whiskey." "Amber. Smooth. Too smooth." "Chemical?" "No taste. Just delay." "Good," he said. "Good? You are alive." "I'm also notebookless." "Yes." He leaned back. "That confirms it," he said. "Confirms what?" "Dane is the killer." "You already knew that?" "No," Wolfe said. "I suspected it. But now I know he isn't alone." I stared. "The drink was drugged," he said. "The disposal was strategic, but the location, the Bronx, was unfamiliar. Clumsy. That was someone else." "An accomplice?" "Yes," he said. "Possibly the one who disposed of Ferris. Possibly the one who retrieved the real coin." "And now?" "Now," Wolfe said, "we invite them both to explain themselves." "To us?" "No," Wolfe said. "To the law." I raised my glass. "How diplomatic." He smiled. "How American." The rain had tapered to a hiss against the brownstone's windows by the time Lucinda stepped inside. I heard the door click behind her, not opened by Fritz, naturally, and I rose from my desk before Wolfe could summon me by name. She wore navy gloves, still damp, and a hat pulled low. Beneath it, her eyes carried the sheen of someone who'd read something once and didn't like reading it again. She walked with pace and purpose, her handbag tucked tight under one arm, as if it were something worth guarding, or surrendering under the right terms. I offered the red chair. She sat. Wolfe in his yellow throne did not stand. He did not nod. He did not offer pleasantries. "Your information," he said. Lucinda's lips pressed thin. She reached into the bag and withdrew a single folded page, aged, crinkled at the seams. She extended it toward me, not Wolfe. That was fair. I took it, unfolded it carefully, and laid it on the desk under the lamplight. Handwritten. Columns: name, nationality, cabin number, roll. There were 13 cabins listed. 12 had been on the public manifest for the Hellas Star. 1 had not. Cabin N, I read aloud. Lucinda nodded. I found it in the supplemental log, not filed at Ellis Island, hidden with the engineering records in the shipping archives. Wolfe leaned forward half an inch. In his world, that counted as rising from his seat. Explain. Lucinda's voice remained steady. The public manifest listed the cultural delegation, the guards, the aides, but not Cabin N. Its occupant boarded last from the port at Gibraltar. He wasn't on the welcome list, and his cabin had 2 locks on the inside. I looked at the name beside the cabin listing. D. Avrakos. Dinos, I said. Yes, Lucinda confirmed. He was listed only by initial, but it's the same man. I checked the docking photo. Wolfe closed his eyes as if testing the name against a list he kept behind his lids. The curator who vanished, he murmured. Yes, I said, the one Lila met in Athens, who disappeared after the reception. Lucinda added, and who wasn't officially part of the diplomatic party. Wolfe's eyes opened. Mr. Goodwin. Yes, sir. Please, fetch the photograph. I crossed to the cabinet, pulled the second drawer and retrieved the envelope marked Hellas Star, dockside. I slid it across the desk. Wolfe didn't touch it. He merely pointed. I removed the print. A black and white of the gangway. Uniformed officers, 2 suited men shaking hands, and behind them, barely visible, a figure near the shadows, coat collar up, face turned. Wolfe said, Hold it to the light. I did. The man's profile was indistinct, but the shoulders were too stiff for staff, and too square for diplomatic baggage. Dinos of Rakos, Wolfe said, confirming it aloud. Lucinda crossed one leg over the other, the heel of her shoe tapping faintly. He returned, she said. There's no record of his disembarkation, but that cabin, it was locked from the inside when they docked. No key? Wolfe asked. Missing. I looked up. So either he never left the ship, or he left before it docked. Wolfe nodded once. Which means he left with the coin. I leaned against the desk. That's the forgery angle. Lila had one. The real one vanished. He smuggled it off, quietly. Lucinda added, and left Dane behind to handle the clean-up. Wolfe turned his eyes to the ceiling, as if it were a puzzle board only he could read. He needed a partner, he said. One to carry the legitimacy, one to carry the item. Dane, I said. Exactly, Wolfe answered. Dane carried the official face. Avrakos carried the truth. Lucinda ungloved her hands. Her nails were clean but chipped. I asked the dock inspector why the list didn't match. He told me some names aren't meant to be read, just remembered by the right people. Wolfe's nostrils flared. That was his version of a wince. Espionage, he said. Low grade, diplomatic, not professional. But dangerous, I said. Yes, Wolfe replied. Dangerous enough to kill, but not careful enough to hide. Lucinda leaned forward. I've seen that coin, she said. The real one. 3 years ago in Istanbul. It was on display for a private audience, behind glass with armed guards. And then, I said, it vanished. She nodded. Wolfe exhaled through his nose. There was no theft, he said. There was a trade. For what? I asked. For silence, Wolfe replied, or for someone's life. Lucinda said nothing. Wolfe added, or perhaps for a future favour. I sat again. My legs had started to ache from standing. So, I asked, what now? Wolfe looked at me. Now, we draw them out. Lucinda asked, how? Wolfe smiled faintly. It was the kind of smile that made orchids tremble. By pretending we know less than we do. I nodded. That's your specialty. It is not, Wolfe said. It's yours. Lucinda said, do you want me to contact Dane? No, Wolfe said. He will contact you. They are watching now, listening. We will feign confusion. We will stir the water. To see who swims toward us, I added. Precisely. There was a silence then, not empty, thick like the moment before glass shatters. Lucinda reached for her gloves again. She slipped them on with care. Wolfe said, your work was commendable. She gave the smallest nod, then turned to me. You'll escort me out? I rose. Wolfe did not move again. At the door, Lucinda paused. I still have friends at the Hellenic office, she said softly. If you want names, dates, shadows. I looked into her eyes. We'll want all three. Then she was gone. I returned to the office. Wolfe had not budged. She trusts you, he said. I know. Be careful with that, I nodded. She's not the type who leaves debts unpaid. She's not the type who leaves, Wolfe corrected. I sat. Wolfe stared into the fire. We have the names now, he said. Avrikos, Dane, Ferris, dead, Lila dead, and the coin moving quietly. I added, and someone still wants it buried. Wolfe nodded. We will not oblige. The fire crackled once. Outside, the rain had stopped. The drawing room was arranged with the same symmetry Wolfe always favoured for moments like these, and tonight that symmetry would turn to steel. The yellow chair faced the hearth, its leather gleaming under the lamplight. Red guest chairs, precisely spaced, framed the rug like chessmen awaiting orders. Velvet curtains drawn, air faintly scented with sandalwood and Fritz's earlier polish. No orchids. Wolfe would not mix them with lies. I stood, as always, near the globe, notebook in hand, pencil tucked behind my ear. Wolfe had not moved for 10 minutes. His hands rested flat on the chair's arms, and his gaze was cast to the middle distance. He could have been a statue of ancient anger, if the glint in his eyes hadn't betrayed calculation. A knock. Once. I moved to the front hall, opened the door 8 inches, Wolfe's rule, and let in the first guest, Inspector Kramer. No uniform, no cigar tonight, just suspicion in a beige overcoat. He nodded, grunted, and stepped past. Second, Lucinda, dressed in a tailored skirt and charcoal blouse. She walked with the calm of someone who had already won something. Third, Mr. Colville, slender, nervous, sweating beneath a tweed coat with worn elbows. He held a leather-bound journal close to his chest. Fourth, Dane, pressed suit, silk scarf, expression of mild boredom, as if he were here to negotiate a dinner seating. Fifth, last, Dinos Avrikos. He entered slowly. His eyes scanned the room as if it might dissolve at any moment. His coat was foreign, Greek tailoring, smooth and low at the collar, and he held a handkerchief he never used. Wolfe spoke. Please sit. The room obeyed. Kramer took the far left chair, Lucinda beside him. Colville clutched his journal and lowered himself next to her. Dane crossed his legs leisurely. Avrikos sat stiffly, straight-backed. I remained standing. Wolfe glanced once at me, then closed his eyes. For a moment, only the fire moved. Mr. Goodwin, Wolfe said. The coin. I stepped to the credenza, opened the second drawer and withdrew the velvet box. I brought it to the centre table, opened it carefully. Inside, the coin. Greek, bronze, dull but dignified. The image of Persephone on one side, an owl tilted on the other. Between them, more than 2,000 years and 3 corpses. Wolfe opened his eyes. This, he said, is not the coin that arrived in New York. Dane shifted slightly, just enough for the scarf to move. It was, he said. I oversaw the courier myself. You did, Wolfe said. That is not contested. What is contested is what you oversaw. Kramer grunted. Cut the riddles, Wolfe. No, Wolfe said evenly. Tonight we are in Athens, and I do not rush Greek theatre. Lucinda's eyes were locked on Avrikos. Wolfe turned slightly toward her. Miss Varelli, you found the passenger ledger? Yes. Unaltered? It was stored in a sealed envelope beneath the engineering manifests. The public copy excluded cabin N. The private one did not. Wolfe nodded. Cabin N, he said, occupied by Mr. Avrikos. Dane opened his mouth. Wolfe raised a finger. Not yet. Avrikos sat very still. Wolfe gestured at the coin. This artifact, he said, was replaced. The real piece, smuggled out through cabin N, its forgery, presented with diplomatic fanfare. Mr. Dane, you were tasked with authenticity. You failed. That's absurd, Dane said, voice low. You have no proof. Colville made a sound like a cough but smaller. Wolfe pointed. Mr. Colville has brought his journal. Colville looked to me, then passed the leather-bound volume forward. I took it. Wolfe did not touch it. Archie. I opened the journal, flipping to the page Wolfe had bookmarked earlier. Colville's handwriting, small, perfect, European, read as follows. June 19th, 11:46 p.m. DA enters the cargo area without clearance. Vessel not yet anchored. Enters with a black box. Exits alone. I read the entry aloud. Wolfe let it hang. Then, DA, of course, is Dinos Avrakos. Avrakos said nothing. Wolfe continued. The box. The same that once held the real coin. It left the ship. Its contents left with it. Dane's voice sharpened. This is conjecture. A man carries a box. And, Wolfe interrupted, you drugged Mr. Goodwin. Dane's face flickered. Lucinda sat upright. Wolfe nodded. Yes, the drug was slipped into the tea you offered him. I confirmed the timeline, 6 minutes after Mr. Goodwin's visit to your boarding house. Dane said nothing. Kramer leaned forward. You drugged Goodwin. No, Dane said too fast. He's lying. Wolfe gestured. Lucinda. She opened her handbag, removed a tissue packet and unfolded a single waxed envelope. Inside, a sample vial, sealed, a faint trace of white powder at the base. The teacup residue, she said. I added, and I didn't stir it. Kramer sat back. His eyes were on Dane now. Wolfe shifted to Avrakos. You boarded in Gibraltar, Wolfe said. You were not listed. You occupied a private cabin. You transported something, alone. You vanished before the official photographs. Avrakos exhaled, once, measured. Wolfe continued. You gave the coin to Dane. You remained in the shadows. You were the logistics. He was the voice. Lucinda said, Lila knew. Yes, Wolfe said softly. She knew the coin was false. She confronted Dane. He silenced her. Dane's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. She, he began. Do not finish it, Wolfe said. You will lie, and it will insult me. Dane swallowed. Wolfe leaned forward. She died in a manner meant to resemble accident, but not so perfectly. It bore fingerprints. Yours. Kramer said, I'll need those prints. They're in the report, Wolfe said. Archie has the file. I nodded. Lucinda turned toward Dane. You killed her. He looked at her, not with fear, but calculation. I preserved the integrity of... You preserved your career, Wolfe said. You preserved your access. You were afraid she'd expose the swap. Dane's shoulders sank. Avrakos cleared his throat. We did it for the artifact's safety, he said quietly. Kramer barked. Oh, shut up. Wolfe raised a brow. Even he hadn't expected that. Avrakos looked at me. Not Wolfe. Me. The coin had enemies, he said. Real ones. If it had arrived openly... It did arrive, Wolfe said. Just not the original. Kramer said. So where's the real one? Wolfe gestured. I opened the drawer beneath the table, removed a second box. I placed it beside the first. The room went still. I opened it. The true coin. Brighter, more worn, not dull at the edge. This one had history in its cracks. Wolfe said, Delivered anonymously, 3 hours ago, by courier. Kramer swore softly. Dane shut his eyes. Wolfe nodded once. The game ends, he said. The Aegean is quiet. No one moved. Then Wolfe stood. Everyone else froze. I detest travel, he said, but I find the sea soothing, in theory. Lucinda rose slowly. Colville followed. Kramer stepped forward. I'll take them both. Wolfe gestured toward Dane and Avrakos. They are yours. Dane said, I want counsel. You'll have it, Kramer replied, and a cell. Avrakos said, I did not kill anyone. No, Wolfe said, but you made it possible. They were escorted out. Only Wolfe, Lucinda and I remained. He returned to his chair. I poured him beer from the sideboard. He drank it without a word. Lucinda said, You knew the whole time. No, Wolfe replied, but I suspected by the fourth lie. And the third dead body, I said. Wolfe didn't smile, but he didn't frown. The fire cracked softly. Lucinda looked at the coin again. It's beautiful. It is, Wolfe said, but not worth dying for. No, she said. Just killing? He didn't answer, and the silence was full. The snow had stopped by morning. Manhattan, briefly exhaling, showed its rooftops in cautious streaks of wet grey and slush. I was the first one up, or rather, the first one downstairs. Fritz was in the kitchen with the low clink of copper against porcelain, the sound of someone reclaiming silence. The front doorbell rang at 9:04, one short ring. I answered it myself, per brownstone protocol. I cracked it the regulation 8 inches. It was Kramer, with coat collar up, scarf wound thick. Behind him, 2 detectives flanked a man apiece, Dane and Avrakos, both in cuffs. "Morning," I said. Kramer didn't blink. "Wolfe in?" "He's vertical." "Good." He stepped in without waiting for a reply. The other 2 followed, with Dane and Avrakos between them like museum pieces no one wanted, but had to transport anyway. I shut the door. Wolfe hates a draft. Kramer went straight through the hall and into the office. I trailed them all, past the globe and the liquor tray, to the room still smelling of sandalwood and cigar memory. Wolfe was seated in his yellow chair. The room's corners seemed to settle into place as he raised his head. Kramer didn't bother with ceremony. "They'll be booked within the hour," he said. "Dane'll fold, the Greek won't." Wolfe simply said, "As predicted." Dane glanced around. He looked tired, like something in him had collapsed after the truth was named aloud. Avrakos didn't bother to look at anyone. Kramer looked at the table. "That the real coin?" Wolfe nodded. "It is." "I'll take it." "You won't." That stopped the room. Kramer blinked. "I beg your pardon?" Wolfe gestured. "Mr. Goodwin." I stepped forward, lifted the velvet box from the table and held it lightly. "I agreed," Wolfe said, "to provide clarity, not souvenirs." "It's evidence," Kramer replied. "It is not," Wolfe said calmly. "It is restitution." He turned to me. "Return it to Miss Varelli." Lucinda had entered moments earlier, silent as a shadow. She now stood near the corner, her coat still damp. She stepped forward, eyes downcast, hands gloved. I handed her the box. "Guard it," Wolfe said, "or bury it." Lucinda said, "Thank you." Wolfe inclined his head. Kramer grunted. "I'll get the paperwork," he muttered. "No damn use arguing." He turned on his heel and motioned. The detectives led Dane and Avrakos out. The cuffs clinked once against the coat fabric. The door closed behind them. Silence returned like a fog. Wolfe reached for the bell cord. A moment later, Fritz entered with a cloth over one hand. He approached Wolfe and bent ever so slightly, presenting a single white dish. Lemon soufflé. Perfect. Fragile. Still warm. Wolfe inhaled once and nodded. Fritz bowed and left. He never lingered. Wolfe took a spoonful, savouring the texture. I leaned near the globe. Lucinda hadn't moved. The velvet box rested in her palm like a stone rescued from the bottom of the sea. "You knew," she said softly. Wolfe didn't look up. "I suspected." "You could have taken credit. The museum would be less grateful than you. And far less polite." She smiled faintly. "You're not what I expected." "I often am not." Lucinda stepped closer, then paused. Her voice, when it came, was lower still. "I hated him for what he did to her." "You were not alone," Wolfe said. "But it won't fix her." "No," he said. "It rarely does." She placed the coin box gently on the edge of the desk. "Let it sleep here tonight. One night without vaults." Wolfe said nothing. She turned, and without another word left the room. Wolfe took another bite of soufflé. I took a moment. He gestured. "A book." "Which?" "Ancient Aegean Maritime Routes, Volume 2, the British edition." I gave him a look. "You're serious?" "Yes." "I'll get it, if it comes with bourbon." He paused, then nodded once. "Fair." I moved toward the shelves. Outside, Manhattan breathed steam through subway grates and chimneys. Another day, wiped clean, at least for a few hours.